Introduction: The Great Enigma of Historical Repetition in Prophecies. Why do all ancient military maps converge on one obscure point in the Middle East? Field facts reveal that throughout history, billions of people with fundamentally opposing beliefs have structured their worldview around a single, unified military scenario. Official reports from research organizations, such as the International Institute for Strategic Studies, consistently highlight the extreme fragility of borders in the Levant. This is precisely the geographic center that ancient texts identified thousands of years ago as the epicenter of decisive, destiny-altering battles. Relying solely on publicly available documents, including the Old Testament, the Book of Revelation, authentic Shia traditions, and Zoroastrian Pahlavi sources, we investigate this phenomenon without any theological judgments that conflict with Quranic principles. We place these texts side by side to uncover whether this astonishing alignment in predicting the collapse of global systems is merely a simple geopolitical coincidence, or a hidden historical truth that the human subconscious has always grasped. Book title: Investigating the Prophecies of the Great Apocalyptic Wars. Is the final battle, Armageddon, predicted among the world's major religions? Author: Vahid Zekavati. Copyright: VMZ Production. Part 1. Megiddo and Judeo-Christian Prophecies. The Ancient Geopolitics of a Name. The most shocking geopolitical reality of the ancient world is that a small, seemingly insignificant hill in the northern historical territories has transformed its name into the greatest terror-inducing word in the collective human memory. This geographic location, which modern researchers identify as the absolute core of Western eschatological prophecies, is an ancient military token. The word Armageddon, consistently utilized in modern literature and international media as the ultimate symbol of the end of the world and comprehensive global warfare, is derived directly from the Hebrew phrase Har Megiddo, meaning the Mount of Megiddo. This region, contrary to popular belief, is not an abstract or mythical concept floating in the clouds, but a highly material, tangible geography on the physical map. Prominent military historians, including Eric H. Klein in his specialized academic work titled The Battles of Armageddon, Megiddo, and the Jezreel Valley from the Bronze Age to the Nuclear Age, have relied on concrete archaeological facts to prove that this valley has witnessed over 34 bloody and decisive battles throughout history. It sits directly on the Via Maris, the ancient trade route connecting the massive empires of Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia. This extensive, bloody history of conflict laid the groundwork for a mindset that inevitably linked the future destiny of the entire globe to the physical transformations of this exact location. Documentary research indicates that the architecture of these prophecies developed within two distinct yet deeply interconnected layers in Hebrew and Christian thought. In the first layer, the texts of the Old Testament, specifically the book of Ezekiel in chapters 38 and 39, delineate a highly detailed scenario. They describe multiple massive armies from distant northern territories, led by a figure named Gog from the land of Magog, launching a coordinated invasion toward this very geography. This ancient text, entirely free from the ideological judgments of the modern era, describes a massive systemic collapse where all traditional political alliances suddenly disintegrate. The written historical facts embedded within this book reveal how a localized regional conflict rapidly escalates to global dimensions, permanently altering the macrostructure of world power. The narrative is sharp. It is precise. On the other hand, in the second layer concerning the New Testament, the book of Revelation in chapter 16, verse 16 explicitly states that the ruling powers of the earth will be gathered together in a place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon, for the battle of that great day. This dramatic visualization has intensely captured the attention of analysts in the field of the history of thought, as it perfectly demonstrates how a geographic name has been cemented over centuries in the subconscious of human societies as the ultimate symbol of the final confrontation between opposing forces. A critical point emphasized by neutral researchers and authors is the profound, undeniable impact of these ancient texts on strategic decision-making in the modern era. Political facts clearly show that apocalyptic thinking tied to Armageddon has never been merely a theological debate confined within the walls of temples. Publicly available documents and the official biographies of global political leaders in the 20th and 21st centuries reveal how these ancient concepts have heavily influenced the military doctrines and foreign policies of major Western powers. When we examine the analytical papers of contemporary think tanks, we immediately notice that the high potential for conflict in the geopolitical zones of the Middle East has repeatedly been matched against these ancient patterns by international experts. This alignment, without validating or invalidating the supernatural aspects, highlights a collective psychological reality. Human beings have a strong underlying tendency to interpret contemporary crises through the lens of ancient vessels. This book, Maintaining Absolute Scientific Neutrality, simply places these data points side by side to show how an ancient prediction about the gathering of armies in a specific valley has managed to survive as a highly influential factor in modern power equations. Beyond the religious dimensions, economic and statistical facts regarding global trade and energy transit lines in the peripheral region of Megiddo reveal exactly why this geography retains such a high potential to become the epicenter of international crises. Strategic analysts, without making any judgments about the prophetic aspects, openly admit that any shift in the balance of power in this narrow geographic strip could subject the entire global economic system to irreversible shocks. The texts of the Book of Revelation and the Book of Ezekiel, without the slightest distortion, show that the ancients were also acutely aware of the vital importance of this communications crossroads. Referring to these official sources helps us understand why the idea of a comprehensive, systemic battle at this exact point has been a shared human concern transcending cultures and national borders. These documents bear the responsibility for their own content, and the author, by merely arranging them systematically, guides the inquiring mind of the reader to ponder. Is the harmony between ancient military geography and the blind spots of modern geopolitics an absolute coincidence, or a recurring pattern in the engineering of history? Part 2. Al-Malahim Al-Uthma, the Islamic textual approach to the decisive battles of the Levant. The most astonishing aspect of examining ancient texts reveals itself when we realize that in the exact same geographic location targeted by Western sources, Islamic documents and traditions also report, with stunning detail, the occurrence of a chain of devastating military conflicts designed to completely transform the political structure of the world. These prophecies, universally recognized in Islamic tradition under the title of Al-Malahim Al-Uthma, fierce battles and tribulations, point to massive, bloody, and highly strategic wars that will take place just before the final transformation of the universe. The term Al-Malahim Al-Uthma, the Great Battle, essentially describes a multinational, comprehensive confrontation that engulfs a vast portion of the Middle East. Neutral researchers, by studying primary Islamic sources, have discovered a profound convergence between these texts and the geopolitical realities of the modern age, a phenomenon that, without relying on personal or factional interpretations, creates deep questions in the subconscious of any thinking human being. These historical reports, without contradicting the jurisprudential frameworks and explicit principles of the Holy Quran, emphasize an unalterable divine tradition. Systems built upon extreme inequality and oppression will ultimately move towards structural self-immolation. Documentary research shows that the primary epicenter of these predicted battles is the geography of Sham, ancient Syria and the Levant, and specific portions of modern-day Iraq. In highly revered and ancient reference books, such as Kitab al-Fitan by Hafiz Nuaym bin Hamad al-Marwazi, a scholar of the 3rd Hijri century, in the Sunni tradition, and the documented book Al-Ghaiba, written by Muhammad bin Ibrahim al-Numani in the Shia tradition, there are numerous reports that map out these conflicts using precise regional names. In these official sources, areas such as Kirgizia, The confluence of the Khabur and Euphrates rivers in eastern Syria, Emak and Dabik, are introduced as the main battlegrounds for massive colliding armies. For instance, the traditions concerning the event of Kirkizia, without passing moral judgment on the warring factions, explicitly state that this massive war will erupt over hidden treasures or highly strategic resources, and the powerful forces of the world will clash so fiercely that their military capabilities will be entirely eroded. Contemporary field facts demonstrate that these regions are exactly the same spots that, over the past few decades, have been the intense focus of international tensions, the presence of foreign armies, and fierce competition over energy resources, a reality that forces any academic researcher to pause and reflect. Another profound psychological and sociological fact embedded within these texts is the highly accurate description of the mental state of societies on the eve of these great battles. These ancient sources predict that prior to the occurrence of Al-Malahim Al-Uthma, the world will suffer from a severe power vacuum and extreme fragility in governance systems, to the point where the masses lose all hope in the reformation of affairs, leading to a widespread intellectual bewilderment enveloping society. Islamic texts identify this chaotic condition as the breeding ground for the emergence of extremist and destructive movements like the Dajjal, Antichrist, and the Sophiani, which stand as ultimate symbols of deviation, media deception, and naked violence. The texts are clear. The warnings are vivid. Matching these scientific and psychological facts with modern phenomena, such as the rampant spread of fake news, the manipulation of public opinion by advanced algorithms, and the rapid growth of extremism, shows how precisely ancient prophecies foresaw the mechanisms of social collapse. The authoritative books of hadith from both major Islamic schools bear the responsibility for this content, demonstrating that these battles are mapped out not for the annihilation of humanity, but as an unavoidable purification process necessary to enter an era of absolute justice under the guidance of the promised Savior. From the perspective of international law and modern military doctrines, the unified focus of all major religions on one specific geographic strip in the Middle East indicates an undeniable reality. This region has always been, and will remain, the beating heart of global strategies. Annual reports from international peace and security study institutes show that the volume of stockpiled weaponry and the severe conflict of interests among major powers in this geography possess the potential to ignite a comprehensive war at any given second. Islamic texts, utilizing a cohesive and simple structure, without falling into the trap of sensationalist fortune-telling, simply articulate laws of cause and effect, that the accumulation of oppression, excessive greed, and economic crises born from usurious and unjust systems will naturally result in a massive military explosion. The author of this work, maintaining complete scientific neutrality and operating entirely within the legal boundaries of free research, places these public facts before your eyes so that you may independently conclude how Islamic texts from a millennium ago clearly predicted the ultimate outcome of this political entropy, without any legal responsibility falling upon the transmitter of these historical accounts. Part 3. Frashokereti and the Cosmic Battle. The ancient roots of the clash between good and evil. The deepest intellectual layers regarding the prediction of a systematic and comprehensive battle at the end of history reveal themselves when we move beyond Abrahamic texts to examine the written documents of one of the world's oldest belief systems, Zoroastrianism. In this ancient school of thought, the ultimate fate of the world is not a random or purposeless destruction, but a highly engineered and definitive process known as Frashokereti, meaning the absolute renewal and complete purification of the earth. Ancient Pahlavi texts such as the Bundahishan, which translates to primal creation, and the Jamispanamic, using simple yet intensely shocking language, predict the occurrence of a global and cosmic war wherein all material and spiritual structures of the earth are severely challenged. Historical facts show that the concept of a final confrontation between good and evil, long before it was adopted into modern political doctrines, was injected into the subconscious of ancient civilizations as a fundamental principle for understanding the trajectory of history. And this convergence with the texts of other religions forces any neutral researcher into deep contemplation. According to the written documentation in these ancient texts, the threshold of the end of history is described as a period of freefall in moral, economic, and environmental dimensions. These sources, devoid of superficial judgments, present astonishing sociological facts. They predict that prior to the emergence of the final savior, known as the Seoshite, the world will plunge into such profound chaos and extreme inequality that treaties will be shattered, human values will fade into obscurity, and radical, destructive rulers will dominate the masses. From a psychological standpoint, these texts describe exactly how humanity, driven by complete despair in existing systems, achieves a mental readiness for a massive transformation. The internationally renowned Iranologist and historian Mary Boyce, in her authoritative book Zoroastrians, Their Religious Beliefs and Practices, presents precise evidence showing how these accurate visualizations of the final battle acted as a primary blueprint, deeply influencing the eschatology of other major world religions. This scientific reality demonstrates that the concept of a final war has been a shared human necessity, a collective psychological mechanism to envision an end to historical suffering. At the very core of this ancient prophecy, the final battle is depicted as a comprehensive confrontation between the armies of Ahura Mazda, the manifestation of truth, light, and cosmic order, and the forces of Ahriman, the manifestation of the lie, darkness, and chaos. The text of the Bundahishan explains that this encounter is not merely a traditional military clash. It is a systemic collapse. Even the elements of nature become deeply entangled in the conflict. Statistical facts and contemporary scientific reports concerning severe climate change, widespread famines, and biological crises align in a remarkably strange way with the descriptions found in these texts regarding the natural disasters that precede Frashokereti. The ancient Zoroastrian sources bear the full responsibility for these claims, illustrating that ultimately, through the melting of metals within the mountains and their flowing across the surface of the earth, a massive physical and spiritual purification process occurs. During this catastrophic yet cleansing event, all destructive forces and systems built upon deception are permanently annihilated, allowing the earth to return to its ideal, eternal state of harmony. From a viewpoint of modern strategic doctrines, the idea of purifying the world through a massive, all-encompassing crisis is exactly what is studied today in political theories under terms like post-crisis reconstruction or the controlled demolition of systems. International think tanks, without making any reference to religious aspects, openly admit that the current global structures, due to their intense internal contradictions, are moving rapidly toward a point of saturation and an unavoidable conflict. The author of this work, adhering strictly to scientific neutrality and without injecting any personal viewpoints, has placed these public facts and primary historical documents alongside one another to complete the research process. These official sources undeniably prove that mankind, thousands of years ago, understood through simple language that in order to establish absolute, sustainable justice, passing through a dark corridor and enduring a massive global battle is inevitable. A concept that, transcending any ideological boundaries, has been permanently recorded as a fixed principle in the history of human thought. Conclusion: the convergence of evidence, when the future aligns with the past. The greatest and most shocking question that forms in the subconscious of any fair-minded individual at the end of this investigative journey is this: how did civilizations separated by thousands of miles precisely map out the exact geography and mechanisms of a single, unified crisis for the end of history? Field and statistical facts of the modern world, entirely separate from any religious speculation, demonstrate an unprecedented fragility in the macro structures of politics, economics, and military power. Official reports from international organizations, such as the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI, clearly confirm that the global arms race and the severe conflict of interests among major powers in the Middle East have reached their highest peak in the last century. This is precisely the exact point that ancient Hebrew, Christian, Islamic, and Zoroastrian texts, thousands of years ago without the aid of modern satellite technology, identified as the central circle of the great final battles. This book, relying on documented and publicly available sources, without attempting to dictate a specific line of thought or judge in favor of any movement, simply arranged historical facts to prove that the concept of Armageddon or Al-Malahim Al-Uthma is not a local myth, but a recurring, highly structured pattern embedded deeply within the collective memory of mankind. Psychological analyses reveal that humanity has always, through these prophecies, predicted the self-destructive mechanisms of material systems. The ancient texts examined in the three preceding sections, each utilizing simple literature, yet possessing a profound structure, demonstrated to us that the accumulation of oppression, moral decay, and extreme economic inequalities will ultimately lead to a systemic entropy and collapse. The natural outcome of this breakdown is a massive military confrontation. These sources, remaining perfectly aligned with jurisprudential and Quranic principles, introduce the ultimate destiny of history not as absolute annihilation, but as the necessary passage through a comprehensive crisis to achieve peace, balance, and sustainable justice under the leadership of a promised Savior. This book, strictly observing freedom of expression and operating entirely within the legal boundaries of research, places the responsibility of the content upon the official sources that issued them. Now, at the conclusion of this unbiased investigation, the answer is left entirely to your inquiring mind. Is this astonishing harmony between ancient warnings and the blind spots of modern geopolitics a simple geometric coincidence? Or are we truly, step by step, walking a path whose exact blueprint was carved into the tablets of history thousands of years ago? Reflecting on this reality is the only key to understanding the transformations of the future.